Hello, and thanks for joining us for this month's edition of The Scope of Things, a no-nonsense look at the realities and enigmas of clinical research, based on those closest to the action who aim for great and, if need be, are willing to shake things up. I'm Deborah Borfitz, Senior Science Writer for Clinical Research News. In today's episode, I'll be speaking with Ardy Arianpour, CEO and co-founder of Seqster, whose current mission in life is to give patients one place to house all their health information and an easy way to share it, including with researchers working on projects relevant to their health, as many of our listeners should be intrigued to learn. Welcome to the podcast, Ardy.
Thank you so much, Deb, for having me on your wonderful podcast. Really looking forward to the discussion today with you.
Me as well. If I am to understand your big aim here in life is to connect together all health data specific to an individual in a meaningful way. For example, taking information from a person's medical records about their trips to the doctor's office or hospital stays, results of various lab tests they've had, medications they've been prescribed, DNA testing they may have had done through 23andMe or Ancestry.com, and data from their Fitbit or Apple Watch, and putting it all in one place for them to view and share as they see fit with their doctor or a clinical researcher, or perhaps a disease-specific patient registry. Do I have that all correct?
You nailed it, Deb. I don't think I could say it actually any better than that. When we first started Seqster, when I founded the company in 2016, we didn't really know, to be honest, what we were going to get into. However, I had spent, and my team and I had spent a decade and a half trailblazing DNA sequencing technologies and actually moving those technologies known as next generation sequencing with genome sequencing into the clinic. Now, DNA is interoperable because it's just ATCG, and it didn't really matter what machines the DNA sequencing files would come off. You can take it from one vendor to another very easily and run analytics on that data piece. However, those tailwinds, like you mentioned, beyond DNA, such as your Fitbit and your Apple Watch and your Garmin and lots of different medical devices. If you look at from 2016 to 2023, we've had, thousands of this sort of technology and wearables and devices that have came out. And those data pieces obviously do not talk to one another. A great example is as simple as your Fitbit and your Apple Watch just do not interchange with data together. You can't actually form a longitudinal graph and look at, even your steps data from your Apple Watch data, as simple as that is, with your Fitbit data. Now, when you get into the electronic health record data, that becomes even more complex. And obviously that was one of our biggest pillars that we wanted to tackle early on. And we didn't know how hard that was going to be too. But one thing that we did differently that has set our company and our technology that we have pioneered apart from anything else out there in clinical research or clinical trials, or in the pharma industry, particularly, that's adopted our technology at scale, is the fact that we put the patient at the center. And so we developed something called person-centric or patient-centric interoperability, and that unlocks all these possibilities and more, whether that's social determinants of health data, whether that's, the FDA approved data that we have, regulated data that's coming directly from the electronic medical records. And getting access to this sort of data is very difficult for research sites. It's very difficult to participate in clinical trials. There's a lot of different hurdles that not only the patients come upon to, but researchers that come upon as well. And so, getting back to your first statement, the mission here was to create a landing where anyone can bring all their health data together in one place and share it on their terms.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I know that your motivation is personal, or at least that's the way it started. You had a grandmother with Alzheimer's, I believe, and mother, and I think your dad as well, had a cancer experience. They were having trouble aggregating their data when they needed to. Tell us the story of what motivated you to start the company, and how personal was that journey?
Yeah, it's really crazy because when you, I guess, do something long enough at the healthcare intersection with technology, I guess somehow at some time point, various different people in your family would get hit with certain diseases.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel so grateful and fortunate. I actually don't know of another founder that I can relate to that has created with his team or her team a technology that saved, their family members' lives. And that's happened, across the board. My background in DNA sequencing and genomic sciences led to Seqster. And, during that time, I spent a decade and a half building two of the largest clinical diagnostic companies that hit on both breast cancer and various different ovarian cancer genes, such as BRCA1 and 2. From there, we understood that data was being siloed. And we always wanted a way to augment, like I said, that clinical diagnostic data with all the other data, hence the word Seqster, because SEQ stands for the seeking or DNA sequencing. It has actually two meanings. And then the stir is all the other data. So I believe Seqster was, invented by patients for patients, not by me, actually, or my team. I did think of the name, and I think you name something, and then from there you have this story of taking care of your grandmother and as a caregiver, and then next thing you know, you create a caregiver feature where you can actually control and monitor a loved one's health from, let's say, San Diego all the way to New York City. That wasn't possible till Seqster. My dad, as a great example, got hit while we were building Seqster, and we used the technology to run a tumor board in 6 hours and get him into surgery in less than 9 days. Wow. And if we didn't have Seqster, maybe he wouldn't be alive today. I know that sounds very forward and bold, but it is the honest truth. Health data is medicine, and that's what we discovered with that. Obviously, my motivation from a young age, my mom got hit with breast cancer when I was entering undergrad as a pre-med student at University of California, Irvine. And I was very interested in oncology because of that. And, when I was young, I got involved in various different research aspects. And now at Seqster, I am so proud that we're disease agnostic. It's not just about cancer patients. It's not just about Alzheimer's patients. It's not just about caregivers. It's about any patient of any color, of any religion, of any walks of way of life.
All of us.
Any disease. And, because of this, that Seqster has been positioned and the technology has been adopted by very large foundations and patient advocacy groups. And I couldn't be more happy about that, because that has a lot of good, I would say, for clinical research, clinical trials. Without those groups, I don't think clinical research would be as useful as it is today.
Yeah. I want to go back about a decade here. I know that you've been, an advocate for the free flow of health information, especially when it has high scientific value. And I want to talk here about the role you played in the landmark Supreme Court decision in 2013 that scrapped gene patents, which is what helped expand access to BRCA gene testing for breast and ovarian cancer risk. So tell us about that and how it shaped the type of company Seqster can now be a decade later.
Yeah, absolutely. So throughout my career, my focus has been really on empowering patients and providing them, equitable access to health information. It's been really simple. But once I got into, I would say, the health IT world and the digital health worlds, I noticed how complex our system was. And, once the gene patents were scrapped, the floodgates of diagnostic testing opened, driving down the price of testing. Now, we have genetic testing to determine anything from food allergies and potential adverse drug reactions to diagnosing the genetic health of, let's say, unborn babies. It's pretty mind-blowing if you take the time to really think about, what has happened in the past 10 years. And it's interesting that you and I are having this discussion because on June 13th, this year, it'll be the 10-year anniversary of that. And other than my birthday and other than the day that I founded Seqster, right before JP Morgan Healthcare Conference, I would say that, June 13th, 2013 is just not only a milestone for humankind and for history for the next thousands of years, but to have been a part of that at such a young age.
Yeah.
I was 33 years old at the time when that was going down. I barely knew what I wanted for breakfast, but was involved with, really, I would say the number one public, legal battle for women's rights. And, we were so motivated back then. And I was so motivated personally because I came from a family of breast cancer survivors.
Yeah.
And so understanding, that market really well. And, I think with the proliferation of testing and data and the data silo problem, it's really still difficult to bring together genetic data with electronic health record data to realize its full potential. And this is, again, it goes back to just the word Seqster. Now, in the last 15 minutes or so speaking, when I say the word Seqster, I think everyone in the audience that's listening understands what that means. It's not just a company. It's not just a word. It's
a mission.
It's beyond that.
Yeah. Yours, though, is not the only company out there trying to aggregate patient records. Need I mention Apple Health Records or alternatives such as One Record, Picnic Health, Patient Bank? There's a bunch of them. How fundamentally is Seqster different, and how does it gain market share given all the competition?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Seqster is very different from the data aggregators. The ones that you mentioned are just data aggregators in the market. As it has, with Seqster, we've automated the EHR data collection, but we also cleanse the data. We visualize the data for the patients and researchers. And we're not a platform. So the biggest differentiator is not just our underlying technology that we have created, but the fact that we have the Seqster operating system that powers real-world data that is regulatory grade and patient matched. If you look at, Picnic Health, it is a tech-enabled service that manually, curates patient data, which is still time-consuming as well as capital and labor-intensive. It can take 60 to 90 days to get one sort of record. One Record's focus has been on establishing, payer claims data connectivity. Other companies such as Apple Health, as you mentioned, rely on only FHIR, which is the Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources API, or HIE, Health Information Exchange Networks, for the EHR connections that they have, which are peer-to-peer and not patient-centric. We found that this model is not scalable, as it requires individual business associate agreements with each provider and just a ton of other stuff that goes into it. Is there business for that? Of course. That's why those guys exist. But the Seqster technology goes beyond these networks, and it offers, automated nationwide EHR connectivity, as well as standardization and visualization of data on the back end to create that longitudinal health record in milliseconds.
Could you describe your customer base just in a nutshell, and who comprises that base?
Yeah. So, when we started early on in 2016, and how we're, again, so different than anything else, is we were a direct-to-consumer play. I still have this dream, Deb, of powering now, it used to be 7 billion, but it's 8 billion people, as I say, on our little spaceship here called Earth, that we have such a short lifespan. And, you just got to do something great. And the greatest thing we can do at Seqster is to, enable people to collect and share their data on their terms. But it wasn't as simple as that, because to go direct to consumer, you'd have to raise billions of dollars of marketing so that you can actually tell the 8 billion people that something like this exists. Usually it's a word of mouth, or maybe there's a chronically ill patient that hears about it and they contact us, and we give all patients free access. But we've never charged a patient to bring all their data together. We do it for the good of mankind. But we pivoted because we have to keep the lights on, obviously.
Right.
Once pharma invested in us, which came from Takeda Pharmaceuticals back in 2020, that changed everything as to creating a patient engagement platform for pharma that was powered by the Seqster operating system. And this is where, right after that, we had several other pharma companies. Our newest pharma company that is public, we have some others that have not yet to be announced, but stay tuned. Super excited about that. But our latest one is with Boehringer Ingelheim, and they're using our technology for real world evidence studies, because our real world data in real time accelerates their clinical trials across the board. And because we're disease agnostic, it doesn't matter if they're using it for, oncology trials, dementia, Alzheimer's trials, CNS trials, autoimmune, rare disease. We've kind of touched everything. And even if it's just an observational study, we did, some great work with AbbVie and building their AbbVie Research Collaborative. And that wouldn't exist if it wasn't for Seqster's technology. And, with these pharma companies, it led to also contract research organizations such as United Biosource and INC and some others. And they use it for a medical release program within their trials, because some of their trials got stuck because they couldn't get data, and they can't ever give patients something back. When you give a white labeled version of Seqster to a patient in a trial, whether you're running that trial from a CRO standpoint or from the sponsor standpoint, it makes it much more meaningful. And this is something that, we fell on accident, but pharma knew exactly what they wanted to do, and they built out our operating system to be really super turbocharged, as I call it. And then from there, at the same time, in parallel, we've been working with numerous patient advocacy groups, such as the National Pancreas Foundation, where we're building the largest patient registry for pancreatic disease in the United States of America. And this sort of thing is really interesting because you can see all the comorbidity of data with our search and query tools that we built in our operating system that no other type of lookalike or competitor has. We have lots of different modules that have been built within Seqster that help not just the patient, Deb, but the researcher to look at that de-identified data so that they can get to drug development processes much faster than the current way that they're doing things.
Yeah. I wanted to ask about this whole transition we're making to decentralized clinical trials, and where does Seqster have a play there, if at all?
Yeah, so, I think decentralized trials, to be honest with you, is a buzzword.
Okay.
That's my personal take on it. It's a clinical trial, right? The same way that I think, digital health is a buzzword. It's health. Whether you want to think of it now or, years later, people will listen to this podcast and understand that those are just like terminology that people use. Certain companies use it, certain, groups use it so that they can utilize it, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But where Seqster sits is whether it's a decentralized trial or a clinical trial or a hybrid trial, whatever you want to call it, at the end of the day, you need to be able to get data. And it doesn't matter if that patient or participant in that decentralized clinical trial, hybrid trial, whether they're going to the site or not. Our technology sits in both ways. If they're going for the site and they're being recruited, they're getting labs drawn, they're getting a bunch of stuff done, and that data needs to come in longitudinally within the trial. If you use the Seqster technology, well, it just does it instantaneously. It cuts, I say through the fats, and it cuts so much cost and savings time. At the same time, it gives something back to both the patient and the researcher in a jiffy. But if it's a decentralized trial and you're in a situation like the pandemic, and that's where Seqster's technology really exploded, and you had billions of people just sitting at home, they weren't going to their provider, they weren't getting labs done, but they had a lot of data from months ago, years ago. How do you get that retrospective data? Well, Seqster automates that process for that clinical trial, for that decentralized trial, for that sponsor, for that pharma company, for that patient advocacy group. That's what we built. That's the difference between others having platforms and we building an operating system. You can think of it as the Microsoft Office for healthcare. That's what we built.
Interesting. Well, since many of our listeners are presumably clinical research professionals who would be interested in other ways the Seqster platform might be used to improve trial conduct, for example, things like patient recruitment, onboarding, tracking, engagement, et cetera, give me sort of the world of possibilities, if you will, and which ones have been tested to date and which ones you would like to see tested.
Yeah, first off, I am so thankful and grateful for our partners. We would not be able to build what we have today as Seqster's operating system for patient data, the operating system for healthcare, the operating system here for digital transformation for pharma companies, clinical research groups, and others, if it weren't for the great innovators at Takeda, at Boehringer Ingelheim, at AbbVie, at NPF, at UBC, at patients like me,
names.
all these folks that we've been working with that are in the space that maybe some are even listeners to this amazing podcast that you and your group have been running now for the past year plus. we had the foundational technology built, but our partners really, like I said, supercharged that. And it's really interesting that every single week, Deb, I get a call from a senior official from one of these big companies that's doing the great work, and they have a brand new use case, or they're stuck on a problem, or they're using some sort of technology that just was not working and they thought it was working because of various different reasons. And so I'm just really happy that we're at an inflection point at Seqster for unlocking all this data for researchers in the right way. It's with patients' consent. It's with, my family and I saying that we want to share our data. And so I encourage anyone that is listening to reach out to us if we can be of help, because, this sort of innovation, if it's siloed, does no good for my family or yours. And before you know it, everyone who's listening to this podcast at some point has been either a patient themselves, or they're going to be a caregiver very soon because they got to take care of mom and dad, or a grandma or a grandpa, or maybe they have a rare disease child that they're currently taking care of, and they hate to carry a big binder of data across providers. I mean, the use cases, Deb, are just mind-blowing for me. And that's because I've seen it for so long now, doing this almost 8 years. And the community, I think, is going to take Seqster to the next level, and I'm so excited about that.
I bet. Yeah, I'm wondering how all this data, this consolidated data on people, gets presented to different types of individuals and whatever needs they might have. I presume it would be presented differently to individuals to the degree that, it's being used by individuals much right now, versus various people on a clinical study team or sponsors, wherever they might sit, or CROs. Can you talk about the different ways and options people have for viewing this information?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's such a great point you bring on, because I think for those that are looking at how does this actually work, well, the power of the Seqster operating system is actually in its ability to display that disparate information depending on its user. So for patients, they're able to see all of their health data in an intuitive and standardized longitudinal timeline, while researchers, on the other hand, are able to see data on an individual or population level, while being able to run queries, like I mentioned before, based on desired data points. So as Seqster gets involved in more clinical trials, decentralized trials, patient registries, working with foundations, working with pharma companies, our capabilities will be enhanced to include more features for both study participants and the researchers. And this is where we're headed.
Excellent. Ardy, I can't wait to see how this grows and where it goes. So much untapped potential here. And your efforts have certainly not gone unnoticed. By my count, you have been the recipient of no less than 24 prestigious entrepreneurial awards in your career. So I will end with a congrats 25 times over, as well as a big thank you on behalf of all patients and their family members out there who have benefited or will benefit from the work you are doing. I hope to speak with you again soon for an update. Thanks for being on the show today, Ardy.
Thank you, Deb, for your kind recognition and for this incredible opportunity to be a guest on your wonderful podcast. We would not be here today without people like you and the patients and partners. So they deserve all the credit, and just a blast having a conversation here. Love to connect on another podcast whenever there's some new updates.
Yep, you got it. I'll be seeking you out. No pun intended. And as always, a big thank you to everyone out there for listening in. For more straight talk on studies involving humans, visit clinicalresearchnewsonline.com. And if you're a clinical research professional, we hope also to see you at our next SCOPE conference, where we make things happen. Bye for now.